Of all the films we might have watched as our introduction to this course, for example, Berlin's Symphony of a Great City or The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, it struck me that Nosferatu would be the best place to start. Why? Because Nosferatu positions German cinema in an artistic movement known as Expressionism, and at a particular point in time, that is almost immediately following the First World War, that together provide a clear sense of the country's state of mind at the dawn of cinema. So let's begin with some artistic and cultural context for Germany in 1922. Perez, who writes the article you'll read in conjunction with viewing Nosferatu, notes that Expressionism was a form of Romanticism in Germany, but a rather peculiar form of it. Romanticism, which had been the ruling expression of art in Germany for a long, long time, tends to celebrate nature, as he says, bringing the self face to face with nature. Expressionism is an extreme form of Romanticism in which the artist can no longer bear the face of nature and must retreat into contemplation of the individual self. When nature is acknowledged in expressionist works of art or theater, dance, or cinema, it's usually in a grotesque and sometimes even horrifying form. Germany had fabricated the idea of expressionism very early in the century. Much of its artworks over those first few decades express a kind of disgust for what they considered the effeminate work of the French Impressionists, for example. Expressionists also rejected realism or any form of conventional beauty. Instead, they used strong colors, oblique angles, and often horrific themes of terror and human debasement in their artwork. The ugly was a common theme. As for historical context, it's important to remember that in 1922, Germany was trying to pull itself together after World War I, in which it had lost over 2 million fighting men and almost 500,000 citizens, many of whom had simply starved to death. Following the war, the Treaty of Versailles, specifically the War Guilt Clause, insisted that Germany accept responsibility for all the war damages suffered by the Allies, and this total reparation sum was about 132 billion gold marks, of which the country could only pay a small percentage. This, of course, effectively bankrupted the country. Then in 1918, the country was struck by the terrible Spanish flu. Many soldiers died in the trenches, and over 400,000 citizens died of the disease in that first year. We'll see in Nosferatu that the cholera that plagues a fictional village has a strong resemblance to the Spanish flu. In almost any introduction to German film, Nosferatu is often shown because it's still considered one of the finest films of that early era. It's purely lucky, however, that we still have a copy of Nosferatu, given that Murnau took his idea for the film from Bram Stoker's novel Dracula. When the film was released, Stoker's widow immediately sued for copyright infringement, and all copies of the film were ordered to be destroyed. A few were secretly kept by fans of the film, making it probably the very first cult movie of all time. So who was Murnau then? Briefly, he was the son of a textile manufacturer in Kassel, which is almost directly in the center of Germany. His original surname was Plump, which he changed to Murnau to avoid the inevitable teasing. Plump in German means dumpy. As a child, he read Shakespeare, Ibsen, Nietzsche, and other works of theater, and he often staged little plays for his family in their home. At university, he studied philology, which is a form of linguistics, and then later a famous theater director invited him to become an actor for his troupe. But the war interceded, and he served in various capacities. Towards the end, he served in the Air Force, and he survived 8 different plane crashes. He was also a gay man whose sexuality led to a certain secrecy and sadness in him. And then when he returned to Berlin after the war, he and his colleague Conrad Veidt launched a production company and quickly produced The Boy in Blue in 1919. Shortly after, they produced another 9 films, many of them with gothic and horror themes. Murnau made a few more films in Germany before moving to the US, where he felt he could practice his sexuality without fear of German taboo and its punitive penal laws. And then he made Sunrise, which earned 3 Academy Awards, and City Girl, which was a box office failure. Then at the age of 42, he was involved in a car accident in which his driver hit a pole on the side of the road, and Murnau hit his head inside the car, and he never recovered. So what, in a nutshell, is the story of Nosferatu? Those of you who've seen any of the Dracula or subsequent Nosferatu films will already know it fairly well. It starts in the Carpathian Mountains, where the real estate agent Thomas Hutter, in this case not Jonathan Harker, has arrived to complete a sale with a very reclusive and very ugly Herr Orlog. While enjoying dinner with his host, Hutter accidentally cuts his finger, with Orlog immediately seizing his hand and sucking the blood. Hutter now realizes that Orlok is no ordinary mortal, and it's also a deal when he witnesses the vampire loading himself into a coffin in preparation for his journey. By the time the ship bearing Orlok arrives at its destination at Hutter's home, the captain and the crew have all been killed and partially eaten. Then comes a series of strange deaths in the little town, which the local authorities attribute to a plague of some sort. But Ellen, who is Hutter's wife, knows better. Knowing that a vampire will die if he's exposed to the sun, she offers herself to Count Orlok, deliberately keeping him entertained until sunrise, but at the cost of her own life. Perez points out that where the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari was shot almost entirely inside a studio, with crooked sets and harsh artificial lights, NOSFERATU takes place in what might otherwise have been the German Romantic past, with its mountains, forests, and picturesque small towns. In NOSFERATU, however, the romanticism of these forms is distorted expressionistically. Forests become predatory. They have sort of clawed trees. The sea is dangerous, always in an animalistic, rolling kind of way. Even the mountains seem sinister. Perez also notes that NOSFERATU is not in any way in the early film a sexy character, as are so many vampires that follow. He instead takes on an animalistic form, like that of a rat, with an almost bald head, rodent teeth, and clawed hands. Everything about the sight of him is associated with illness and death. Even the doorways he walks through are shaped like coffins. Against this figure of death is the young couple. Perez notes that the husband, Thomas Hutter, is the sort of man who thinks that death happens only to other people. He ignores the bite marks on his neck, for example, so he can complete his real estate deal. On the other hand, the young wife, Ellen, knows intuitively that her husband is in danger. Now, as the young Hutter and Count Orlok travel towards the little town, the meeting of young life and diseased death is at hand. If you've already read the article, you'll know that Perez switches at this point into a technical discussion about cross-cutting and proximate vision, amongst other things. Don't worry about this just yet. We'll discuss these themes in class. For now, watch the film closely for its particularly German elements of expressionism and fatalism, and enjoy.